What's up guys, welcome to AnimeKouhai. If you want to help me out, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel.
It wasn't something you could pull off on short notice, so they had agreed to reach out to each other only at certain times. So Masayuki shut it off and sighed.
Yuki worries far too much.
You said it.
Jinrai nodded.
If you wanted to beat a demon lord, Masayuki, that couldn't possibly be a problem for you.
Bernie was less optimistic.
I'll remind you that even Hinata the Saint could only fight this Rimuru to a draw. It'd be wise not to let your guard down.
Masayuki gave this a vague nod. It made him think a bit. Things had gone swimmingly up to now, but really, he hadn't done much at all. He didn't know Hinata, they had never met, but Yuki had nothing but praise for her, and Masayuki respected him. If she couldn't beat this guy, maybe he was a lot tougher than Masayuki thought at the moment. It gave him pause.
Yeah, you're right. Everyone says Rimuru wants to make nice with people. We probably shouldn't go in raring for a fight.
Sounds to me like this demon lord knows his days are numbered.
Demon lords are evil, plain and simple,
said Jiwoo.
Well,
Bernie added.
We'll have to see how he acts and decide based on that. But if the Saint and the Demon Lord have reached an agreement on matters, then only you, Masayuki, are qualified to be a true hero. You had best act carefully along those lines.
Masayuki nodded.
Yeah, with all your help, I bet I could beat him, but let's take things slow and steady, okay?
The question of whether to fight Rimuru would be left for later. For now, they would wait and see. In the eyes of Masayuki, all three of his companions, Jinrai, Bernie, and Jiwoo, were utter beasts. He himself was nothing to write home about, but he couldn't imagine anyone from this trio actually losing a battle. I mean, he reasoned, if I actually got in a fight, I guess I'd win somehow, but it's not like I got a grudge against this Rimuru guy or anything. No point trying to start trouble. So as they packed up and set off for Tempest, he was pretty optimistic about how this trip would go. Even after all those royal audiences I gave, my schedule was just absolutely packed. Now I was entertaining human guests. At the moment, our nation was receiving delegations from all around the world, one after the other. Some of the earlier parties arrived a good week ago, I heard. And not all of them received formal invites. There were also merchants, picking up on the rumors and bringing even more energy to town. Previous visitors were showing them and other new guys around, acting all proud of themselves, and even the nobler dignitaries and royal families stopping and looked around in wonder at the unfamiliar sights. It seemed, at first glance, that my expectations had paid off and our plan to make this a tourist hub was working. Still, our town was only large enough to lodge maybe 3,000 nobles at best. For commoners, that number was more around 10,000, but in terms of higher-end accommodation, there wasn't quite that much. The service and the dining we had to offer were completely different, and considering we had people in royal lines of succession showing up, we had to consider security as well. Thus we made sure each noble was given ample space to work with. Given all the dignitaries we invited, we had banned the general public from our luxury inns, whether they could afford a suite or not. Some of the richer merchants in town could, but I was worried about offending them if we were too busy with nobility to offer good service. But apparently, I didn't need to worry. Myeolmile was on it, making sure all the more powerful of the merchant class were set up to their satisfaction.
Great job, Molly.
Ah, Sir Rimuru, this much is simple to provide. You have Sir Rigard and everyone else in town to thank for making a habit of being so thorough with their work.
Myeolmile was a really reliable guy. It went without saying that Rigard, Rigger, and everybody working under them deserved great praise, but when it came to good customer service and satisfied lodgers, Myeolmile was my go-to man. All things considered, I figured we were off to a pretty good start.
Okay, keep it up.
That I will.
Leaving the rest to Myeolmile, I resolved to devote myself to our most important of visitors. We were in our meeting hall. Shuna and Shion were busy with all sorts of prep work. Catering for such a large crowd, after all, meant careful advance preparation. And Gabble and Karabe were just as busy, performing final checks on the exhibits they had going. Since I wasn't dealing with monsters right now, I didn't need to put on such an overpowering, I am stronger than you act. Thus I figured we didn't need my entire staff on hand. And given the lack of a strict species-based hierarchy, things didn't have to be nearly as solemn and pretentious. I was, obviously, in human form, dressed to the nines in order to express my force and financial wealth. That part, frankly, I didn't care about. Being a slime would have been a lot easier, but I'd given up on pushing that. On that note, none of my advisors was willing to budge. The nobility from the Western nations were inoffensive enough in their greetings to me. The King of Bloomend arrived in the midst of our hellos, looking like the same nice, approachable middle-aged man as ever, the kind of king you'd expect in an illustration from a book of fairy tales. Next to him was his queen, beautiful and still looking young. I didn't know her age, but apparently they had been married over 20 years. At first glance, they didn't look like the best of matches, but they were a loving one, and the people of Bloomend were great fans of them both.
I must apologize for not thanking you sooner.
He told me.
You winning over Marquis Muller and Earl Hellman, as well as applying pressure to the Western Holy Church, helped us all a great deal.
It was this man's consent that had allowed Fuse to move so freely. I could have pulled off that plan only because of the promises he kept. And thanks to his singing my praises far and wide, my reputation actually didn't seem that bad. Judging by the increasing number of merchants coming to my nation, the Kingdom of Bloomend certainly proved influential to me. I gave the king thanks, but he laughed and waved it off.
No, Sir Rimuru. There's hardly any need to thank me. All we did was live up to the terms of the treaty we ratified. And did Fuse tell you, by the way? I had staked quite a bit on you. Our nation's fate, in fact, is now tied in with yours. And I did this because we do stand to profit, of course, so there's no need for further thanks.
He gave me a gregarious smile, but I could tell the King of Bloomend could not be taken lightly. He just said, to my face, that he had his own interests in mind. The idea of requiring further thanks made him laugh.
Still,
I said,
I am happy to see that you trusted in us.
Showing gratitude is always important. I didn't mean to keep banging on this point, but I wanted to bring it across.
I truly wonder if you really are a demon lord sometimes.
The king replied with a snicker. Then he recomposed himself and looked me in the eye.
And I do understand that our Viscount Kazak caused you quite a bit of trouble. I'm quite glad you were able to rescue your countrymen from him.
Ah, Viscount Kazak. It was mostly Mjolmile he'd caused trouble for, though. And if I had to guess, that Orthrus gang had been operating in the forest of Jura well before I became Demon Lord. But it was a stain on the reputation of Bloomend, I suppose, although it really all came down to the Viscount himself. He was just a patsy, really. A horrible man. It wasn't like he'd personally cracked the whip or anything, but a crime is a crime, as much as Kazak apparently crowed about how the nobility can treat low-born monsters any way they want without penalty. Expecting to get off scot-free was far too selfish.
Well, with everything fully settled now, I have no interest in dragging that case any further.
I replied.
I appreciate that.
So what will you be doing with him?
As part of Bloomend's nobility, I couldn't prosecute him under my own rules, but no punishment at all was unacceptable. I didn't want to make this a huge incident, but whether or not I did anything depended on the King of Bloomend. He, fortunately, understood this.
Kazak no longer holds a noble title,
he said, voice turning low and ominous.
Given his ties with international criminal gangs, it's fair to say he's forgotten his duties as a nobleman. I would hardly abide the likes of him referring to himself as Bloomundian nobility. Thus, he has been stripped of his titles and exiled from our lands. The House of Kazak is no more, and thus I consider the case to be closed.
No problems there. It almost seemed too harsh a penalty, but then, slave trading violates international law. Treating him with kid gloves could even make Bloomend's king look like a pushover. Thinking of it that way, the punishment felt almost merciful to me. Kazak had been a noble his whole life. Finding another life for himself would doubtlessly pose difficulties. Without his name, fortune, or even a familiar homeland, I didn't envy the path this man had ahead of him. But if he could stay alive, maybe he could turn over a new leaf. The punishment fit the crime, certainly, and I had no objection to it.
Very well, I am willing to accept that punishment.
A relief to hear. Is it safe to say that our treaty remains in effect, then?
I'd hope for nothing else. May we remain partners for years to come.
We exchanged a firm handshake. The incident was behind us. Now it was on to the main subject. The king's face brightened as he immediately got down to the business on his mind.
Sir Rimuru, I heard the news from Fuse. He spoke of some grand operation you had in the planning stages?
Apparently, he wanted to hear more about the outlook on the future I'd given Fuse.
Well, that's something involving much more than just your kingdom and mine. I'm hoping we can assemble representatives from all the nations involved for further discussion. I intended to travel to you to discuss it in detail, but...
No need to be so secretive. Fuse gave me a short rundown, but it sounds like something that could very well affect our position in the world. I could hardly leave the matter to my bureaucracy.
In that case, I could go into some detail.
The official discussion was planned for another day. For now, I gave the king my basic plans for turning Bloomend into a distribution hub for the world at large. But
I see.
My lord, this sounds like a proposal we should move every mountain to make a reality, doesn't it?
I had given only a quick rundown, but the king had a different look about him by this point. The real him was now on the surface, revealing a man burning with ambition, and his queen, who hadn't spoken until now, had just as much trouble hiding her excitement. It seemed this woman was as equally astute as her husband. No doubt my pitch was all she'd needed to accurately calculate how much profit was on the table. Bloomend's king wasn't their only leader I should watch out for. Here we had a king with a gambler's penchant for snap decisions, along with a calm, collected, and calculating queen. Their powers combined must have been what had made this small kingdom so continuously influential.
Of course.
I cautioned.
This only happens after the Founders' Festival is a resounding success. It's still 3 days before it begins.
I'm sure there is little to worry about. Why, it hasn't started yet, and just look at how lively things are. And I can only imagine how many nobles worldwide are making the journey over here.
I can only imagine,
Echoed the queen.
but as you said, Sir Rimuru, there is no need for us to hurry matters. A plan like the one you proposed will require an agreement from all the nations involved. In the meantime, we will work with our own government to ensure a consensus on this matter.
That's it for this video, guys. Thank you for always watching my videos and supporting my channel. Shout out to Ashley Lobo, Luke Devilux, Neil Thakar, Shinigami, Nicholas William Custodio, Mark Gian Prospero, Kurt Iligan, Yusef BTR, BLK Pandalans, and last but not the least, shout out to John Mitch Lucanias. I'll see you guys in the next video.